How y'all doing? Y'all know the people in Israel, they wanted to hear from God until God started requiring change. And that's the tension in chapter 19 through 21 of Exodus. Israel, they wanted freedom from Egypt. We know that. They wanted God to move on their behalf. But once they arrived at Mount Sinai, they start realizing that being close to God requires obedience, responsibility, holiness, and surrender. And honestly, it's kind of similar, y'all, to asking a trainer for help, and then we want them to change our life physically, right? And a lot of people, we love the idea of that, of transformation, until we realize the requirements that it takes, the discipline, the consistency, the correction, discomfort, and accountability, the dieting, all that. Everybody wants the result, but not everybody wants the process that comes with it. I know that was me before. I'm like, ooh, give me a workout plan, but I was still eating McDonald's. That's exactly what starts happening at Mount Sinai, y'all. The people wanted God until they saw what his presence actually required. And chapter 19 begins with God reminding Israel who they were supposed to become. The children of Israel were meant to be God's prized possession. Now, back in the book of Genesis chapter 12, God promised Abraham that Israel would be a great nation and a special object of his blessing. But the blessing was never meant to stay with them alone. Israel was supposed to become a source of blessings to other nations too. Now, God speaks to Moses, y'all, on Mount Sinai and tells him to remind the people of what he did to the Egyptians and how he bare them on eagle wings and brought them unto himself. In other words, God wanted them to remember that the deliverance wasn't because of their own strength. He carried them through it. Then God tells him that they must obey his voice, keep his covenant, and they would be a peculiar treasure unto him above all people. And that matters too, y'all, because God wasn't just rescuing them from slavery. He was establishing a covenant, like a relationship with them. And deliverance came with responsibility. Now, what's interesting, why I keep saying now, I'm sorry, y'all. What's interesting is that Israel responded with eagerness at first. They trusted the character of God enough to say that they would obey everything he commanded. At this point, they were anticipating the law because they had already seen God move on their behalf. And before God appeared to them, though, preparation had to take place. It had to take place. The people were told to sanctify themselves, wash their clothes, and prepare for the third day. One instruction even included abstaining from sexual relations temporarily as part of their consecrations before God appeared. This shows the approaching God. Well, I can't say the approaching God. This shows that approaching God was never supposed to be treated casually, y'all. Then the moment finally comes. God descends on Mount Sinai, and the scene is intense. There's thundering, there's lightning, there's a thick cloud over the mountain, smoke rising up like a furnace, and the whole mountain starts shaking violently. And on top of that, the sound of a trumpet keeps getting louder and louder. That wasn't quiet, y'all. It wasn't soft nor casual. Oh my goodness. The mountain was covered in fire and smoke because the Lord descended upon it. The people were warned that anyone who touched the mountain or crossed the boundary would die, man or beast, didn't matter. Even the priest had to sanctify themselves before God because he is holy. Now, one detail that stands out is that Moses speaks and God answers him audibly. Imagine hearing God respond out loud when you talk to him. Even after Moses had already set boundaries around the mountain, God tells him again to go back down and warn the people not to break through and come near. Moses told him the first time, like, I told them, but God told him to go back down and make sure, because people act like they can't hear. And that moment reveals something people still misunderstand today. God is loving, he's merciful and patient, but he's also holy, powerful, and not to be treated casually. And the Israelites, they wanted God until they saw what his presence actually required, like I said earlier, and people still respond that way now. They do. People want deliverance, they want blessings, healings, favor, and We all want God to move when we say so. But when his presence starts exposing our pride, sin, unforgiveness, compromise, or rebellion, a lot of us back away. We back away. And Israel, they wanted freedom from Egypt, but now God was showing them that being chosen also came with holiness and obedience. You just can't get what you want and then live how you want. Moving on to verse 6 in chapter 19, y'all. God says that Israel was supposed to become a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That connects directly to chapter 20 and the giving of the law. If Israel was going to represent God, they had to reflect his character. Y'all know in the New Testament, be ye holy, for I am holy. Come on now, y'all. Now, the law revealed God's holiness and showed how the people were supposed to live, and they were supposed to live differently from the other nations. God wasn't giving laws just to control people. He was teaching a delivered people how to live differently. And the Ten Commandments, y'all, they became both Israel's national foundation and a personal responsibility for each individual. One overlooked detail is that the thou in the commandments is singular. It's singular, y'all. That means every individual person was accountable before God, not just the nation as a whole. God himself, he spoke the commandments aloud to the people, and the people became terrified. They stood far off and they begged Moses to be an intercessor because they were afraid they would die if God continued speaking directly to them. So some people still do that today. Some do. They want someone else to hear from God for them while keeping their own distance from him. And when you go to chapter 20, that reveals two types of fear. The same type of fear that some people may wrestle with today. Moses tells them not to fear, but then he says that the fear of God should remain with them. The first fear is tormenting fear that causes people to run from God, like deeply afraid fear. The second fear is reverence. It's a deep respect and acknowledgement of God's holiness and power. That kind of fear helps keep people from sin because it reminds them who God is. And a lot of people today have lost that kind of reverence. Many people want the benefits of God without wanting conviction, obedience, and surrender. It's a shame. But hey, let's get back to the chapters, y'all. These chapters, they give instructions regarding worship and clearly forbids idolatry. Not only were they forbidden for worshiping false gods, but there also seems to be warning against creating physical images to represent God himself. God can't be reduced to something made by human hands. And, once God established who he was and what holiness looks like, he then began teaching them how that holiness should affect everyday life. You can't just be holy on 3 days out of the week. But let's move on to chapter 21, y'all. Chapter 21, it shifts into what become known as the Mosaic laws. I think I'm pronouncing that right, y'all. Mosaic. After deliverance came structure. Yeah, you needed the structure. God established laws regarding servants, justice, personal injury, property, responsibility, and how people were supposed to treat one another. This chapter shows that freedom doesn't mean the absence of order. God was building a nation. And, when a nation is built, it requires justice, accountability, mercy, and structure. And the laws in chapter 21 connect directly back to the Ten Commandments because God prohibited murder, stealing, abuse, and injustice. And one important detail is that it was even for servants. They were to be treated as human beings with dignity. God established protection for them, preserved family relationship, and he gave them principles that later connected to what became known as the year of Jubilee. Ooh, I'm running out of breath, y'all. Now, that mattered because many surrounding nations treated servants as disposable property, but God was establishing a different standard for Israel. These chapters also show that holiness was never supposed to apply only to worship, service, or sacrifice, y'all. It was also supposed to be applied to how people treated each other, how they handled power, how they responded when they hurt somebody else, how they treated vulnerable people, and how they lived daily. 24/7, because real holiness affects both worship and behavior. And one of the biggest lessons that I see in these chapters is that God didn't bring Israel out of Egypt just to leave them the same. He didn't. He delivered them physically, but he was also transforming them spiritually, mentally, morally, and culturally. And that's still what God does today. That's still what he does today, y'all. And maybe, just maybe, the real question in these chapters leave us with, do we actually want closeness with God, or do we only want what God can give us? That's a honest question. Because Israel, they wanted protection, promises, blessings, and deliverance. But when the mountain started shaking and the fire appeared and the voice of God became real, many of them stepped back and wanted Moses to stand in between them and be that buffer for them to God, and vice versa. People still do that today. Some people want pastors, leaders, family members, and other people to carry all the spiritual weight while they stay at a distance themselves. Ooh, pray for me, but you won't pray for yourself. But God was showing Israel something important on Mount Sinai, y'all. Deliverance was only the beginning. That's exactly what he was showing them. But hey, he didn't bring them out of Egypt just to leave them unchanged. They must have assumed that. He was teaching them how to live differently, think differently, worship differently, and represent him differently. Because real relationship with God, it eventually starts confronting your pride, compromises, idols, people, rebellion, and the things other people try to hold on to, or even ourselves, what we try to hold on to. Everybody wants the new life that God promises, but most people struggle with the process of dying of the old ways first. And that's why some people stopped at the bottom of that mountain while Moses kept going up. Not because Moses was better than everybody else, y'all, but because he was willing to keep obeying even when it became uncomfortable. And plus, the people were supposed to stay down anyway. But after reading this chapter, I came with a question, y'all. If getting closer to God required real change, would you still keep climbing? Would we still keep climbing?